Ruining the street.
All right, whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is Joey Rios, and I must warn you before I begin the subject I'm going to be talking about is very frightening and causes some people to lose sleep at night. And also, some say it will be the destruction of humanity as we know it. No, it's not Miley Cyrus twerking. It's global warming, also known as climate change. But I'm going to say, but everything's going to be all right. My first claim is that, my main claim is mankind has minimal effects to the Earth's natural cycle of climate change. I'll be proving this by proving that the correlation between CO2 rising followed by temperature increase is absent. Also that current climate models are incorrect. Lastly, that the effect of man-made emissions of greenhouse gas are negligible to the Earth's atmosphere. To my first point, that the correlation between CO2 rising followed by temperature increase is absent. The New York Daily News quoted the University of Copenhagen saying that coming out of the last ice age, 19,000 years ago, that when temperature rise, there was a lag between temperature rise and the CO2 being produced in the atmosphere by 1,000 years. Frederick Perrin of the Laboratory of Glaciology and Geophysical Environment in France also did a research in the Arctic ice, did a 30-year research trying to find the correlation between CO2 and the ice. And they found out there was a 200-year lag instead of 1,000 years. Both studies showing that there is still a lag between when temperature rise and when CO2 will rise. The Earth's temperature has been the same over the 15 years. Forbes magazine quoted the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration saying that the Earth's temperature has been the same since 1995. That CO2 rising is still continuing, but the temperature does not follow during that time period. Also, still continuing to quote that between 1945 and 1975, the temperature actually did a decrease, even though CO2 rising still continued to flourish, showing that the relation is absent. My next point, climate models are incorrect. Past climate models, in 2007, BBC did a report saying that by 2007, the Arctic ice will be gone by the summer of 2013. We all know that hasn't happened. They quoted Professor Winslow Maslowski and Cambridge University Professor Peter Wensam saying their models are more efficient than others because it takes accountable for the process that happens internally in the ice. He said, it is not a cycle. In the end, it will melt quite suddenly. Like I said before, the Arctic ice is still there. Current IPCC models are incorrect. IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. Their climate models are correct only 2% of the time. Heartland magazine quoted lead author Hans von Starks saying that the IPCC models are 98% wrong because in their model shows between the last 15 years that the Fahrenheit of the temperature should have rose 0.45 degrees Fahrenheit, but in reality it only changed 0.11 degrees, which is basically nothing. Continuing their quote saying that next year when they have the IPCC meeting, they're going to have to confront this problem. NASA, Forbes magazine found an article from NASA showing that the reason that they were having this discrepancy was because that the IPCC models were showing that the atmosphere was holding too much of the CO2 that's being released in the atmosphere, but NASA satellites are showing that more heat is releasing from the atmosphere than the models predicted, so that's one of the reasons why the IPCC models are wrong. My third point is that the effects of man-made emissions of greenhouse gas are negligible to the Earth's atmosphere. Dr. Roy Spencer, research scientist in Alabama and Huntsville, also the senior scientist for NASA's Flight Center, also received the NASA Achievement Medal, said that if CO2 itself is a weak greenhouse gas, with current climate as it is right now. And if we double the CO2, the Earth will only fill a 1 degree Celsius and change. That's doubling the CO2 that's currently right now. Lastly, continuing that point, methane gas is also a CO2, is a greenhouse gas that is produced by man. The Daily Galaxy quoted Michigan Institute of Technology, Department of Earth, saying that the Earth has free radical hydraulics, also known as OH, occurring naturally in the atmosphere, which destroys the current methane that is being released by man or by Earth, showing it's an atmospheric cleanser that has been shown to adjust itself up and down periodically, which will account for the lack of methane that's in the atmosphere caused by Earth or by man. So those are the reasons why that man-made has minimal effect to the Earth's natural climate change. Thank you. Anybody else? Ryan? Trying to keep me on the loop, I see.
All right, Joey, there's a little bit of humor in the introduction, which is fine, but you need to deliver it a little bit more naturally. I think you're, maybe a little tense, a little intense too, and it's a joke there at the beginning, and so you need to talk to us a little bit more calmly. And I think that that's a problem in a couple of other places too, because you have a tendency to kind of punch your way through each of the supporting points instead of transitioning to the points, and it just feels like a little bit like we're getting a check-off list on things. Well, there's the introduction check, here's the topic check, here's my first point check, here's the third point check, that sort of thing, and it needs to flow a little bit more naturally. On the other hand, there are good things about the presentation. It's very clear what your proposition is. You have a good layout of what the supporting structure is going to be. You signpost that very clearly, and your claims are labeled so that we know where we are at any given point in the speech. I think you do an excellent job talking to the audience. You're not dependent on your notes. You look at them only when you need key pieces of information. I think you do need to have that information cited a little bit more consistently. I thought that you did a good job in a couple of spots trying to give qualifications to your sources, but there's often information here that needs to be explained a little bit more. For example, on that whole last point about the natural filters in the atmosphere that are apparently correcting for the amount of methane in the atmosphere. So how would that affect those other models? Is there something similar to that is affecting CO2? Could there be something that we haven't discovered that would mitigate the models also? What inference is it that you're trying to get us to make from that? You've given us the information, but you need to explain to us a little bit more what that means. When you have the statistic that says that even if we doubled the CO2, the increase in the temperature would only be a 1 degree increase in Celsius, so what is the ramification for that? Is a 1 degree change in Celsius around the world not dangerous? Will it result in no significant consequences? Or will the consequences be much milder than have been predicted? So I think you've got the right kind of information, but you need to follow through a little bit on some of the implications that you're making there. Like I said, I thought that you had a very effective visual delivery. The oral delivery, I think, is just a little... what would you... The pacings, I don't want you finished right on time, so I'm sure you were just trying to get done. And sometimes maybe a little bit more practice so it sounds more natural as opposed to you're running over your own arguments. All right, thank you.